Hi, everyone. Welcome to Google DC. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Carly Eason, and I am on the civics team here at YouTube. And we are really excited to kick off this year's masterclass all about the power of podcasting. I don't think I have to explain to anyone in this room or anyone with 2 ears or 2 eyes that podcasting has become a huge part of American culture, American news, and certainly with the last election, American politics, and how voters end up getting their information. So we thought that certainly our civics audience here in DC and across the country could learn a little bit from our master creators who have been using podcasting to reach audiences and build community across the country for quite some time. Today, we have a great program, and we're really excited to kick it off with you both today in person for folks who are here in DC and then folks who are tuning in virtually. We have a really good agenda. So first, we'll have a briefing from our podcasting team all about podcasting on YouTube, the medium itself, how video has emerged in podcasting, and then some really exciting numbers that we announced in the last few weeks about some milestones that YouTube has celebrated with our podcasting product. Then we'll have probably what you're all actually here for, a fireside chat with Nick Viall of the Viall Files, and he'll dive in all about what makes podcasting such an amazing medium for connecting with folks, and then take some questions both from the audience here in person and online. Then we'll dive into our civics session, which will kind of be an explainer for you about how to use podcasting in your communication strategy, whether that's creating your own podcast, if you are brave, or if you really want to take podcasting as an additional place in your media strategy for pitching your principal or for going on press hits, treating it like, your morning Fox News hit or your morning CNN hit, but instead going on podcasting. So we'll dive into that, the pros and cons of both, and what maybe make the most sense for you. And then it wouldn't be 2025 and it wouldn't be Google if we didn't talk about AI. So we're excited to bring a specialized session from our colleagues over at Google about how to leverage AI to make your podcasting journey a little bit easier. We love using AI to make our workflows smoother, faster. I always say work smarter, not harder. And so you'll get to learn a little bit about how to do that. So to kick things off, from visiting us from New York, we're so lucky to have Erica Kornblue from the YouTube podcasting team, who's going to dive in and tell you all about what makes podcasting at YouTube the #1 platform in the US. Welcome.
Here you go. Hi, everyone. As Carly mentioned, my name is Erica. I'm a partner manager on our podcasting team in New York City, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today in our nation's capital. I haven't been here since 2009 when I was looking at colleges, so it's great to be back here for this with all of you today. Let's dig right into it. So about 3 years ago, YouTube really started investing in podcasting. My team was formed, and we started going out into the market and telling everyone that video was really the future of podcasting. We stuck to our convictions, and our convictions really paid off. We've not only changed the media landscape, but we've really changed culture too. So just recently, as you'll see different articles noting on this slide, Call Her Daddy moved from Spotify to SiriusXM. And in the wake of that deal, Alex was insistent on being able to bring her full video podcast to YouTube. And now they actually are here exclusively as well. And her reasoning behind that is because she recognizes the ability to much more easily find new audiences on YouTube and get new ad dollars. As I'm sure also all of you are acutely aware, the 2024 election was deemed as the podcast election, with both of the presidential hopefuls at the time going on different podcasts, Call Her Daddy again being one of them, the Joe Rogan Experience, Club Shay Shay, and Theo Von's podcast, just to name a few. And even recently, the White House has opened its briefing room to creators and podcasters specifically, showing that podcasts are really here to stay. And the last thing I want to call out is that in late 2024, Cristiano Ronaldo debuted his podcast on YouTube. And on his first episode, he got 17 million views. And after he uploaded his first piece of content, he had over 30 million subscribers. This was just in 2 days, So it's pretty incredible what he was able to leverage on the platform. And so all of that being said, you might be wondering, why are these folks seeing so much success on YouTube? And why are audiences now coming to watch podcasts on YouTube? So we'll get into that, but first I want to show you a few statistics. So you're going to see a big couple number ones behind me. But among weekly podcast listeners surveyed in the US, YouTube is the most frequently used service for listening to podcasts. And we've been number one since Q1 of 2024, and we've remained in the number one spot. This is according to Edison. Other research companies have run the same research study, and we show up in number one in most of those slots. And then this is really hot off the press. It's actually, I think, the first time we're talking about it in a public forum like this one. But just last week, we announced that there are more than 1 billion monthly active viewers of podcast content on YouTube, which is very exciting. And then also, as part of that press brief, which I want to bring up here quickly, is that 400 million monthly hours of podcasts were consumed on TV sets. We'll get into more of like the power of the living room and the television in a future slide, but because it was part of last week's press announcement, wanted to make sure to stick that number in here as well. So much of what helps podcasts thrive on YouTube is our search and discovery capability. As I'm sure you all know, we are the number 2 search engine in the world, second to obviously Google. So historically too, podcasts have really, to get your podcast seen by many audiences, you've had to just really rely on word of mouth. So one of your fans going out and telling all of their friends and family members to listen to your podcast. And there were also high switching costs involved because, one person might have been listening on Spotify, another person might have been listening on Apple, one's subscribed to one, one's not subscribed to the other. And it was kind of hard to share podcasts in that way. But now with YouTube, aside from being the second largest search engine in the world, it's so easy to just send someone a YouTube link to either a podcaster's channel or a podcaster's episode. And what's also really great is you can send a hyperlink that drops someone into the episode, like exactly where you want them to be. So sharing podcasts has just become really easier with YouTube. And then I'm going to read these so I don't mess them up. But so the power of our search capabilities is emphasized by the fact that new to podcast audiences who started listening to podcasts in the 6 months prior to the study, whereas where they started listening to podcasts, and 31% said YouTube, and that's the highest percentage of all the other surfaces that were asked about. And then Edison's Gen Z report found that 84% of Gen Z monthly podcast listeners used YouTube to discover a podcast. I'm a millennial. We're slowly being, kicked out of the talking points. And Gen Z's, where everyone wants to be. So they are on YouTube. So we've spent the past few years really enhancing the podcast experience on YouTube, and that goes for both YouTube Main, as we'll refer to it, and YouTube Music. But before I dive in more to each of those surfaces, something we really worked hard on is making sure the two surfaces talk to each other and we're working in sync with one another. So I can talk about that in the context of my own morning. So let's say I wake up in the morning, which is hard for me to do. I'm not a morning person. And I head over to my couch. And instead of now maybe turning on the Today Show or Live with Mark and Kelly and Mark, whatever they go by now, don't tell them I switched their names. So whichever one of those, I go to the YouTube app and I put on, very appropriately, the latest episode of the Viall Files. So I open the app, the YouTube app on my TV, and I start watching there. Then after a little bit of time, I haven't finished the episode, but it's time for me to start my morning walk to work. I turn off my TV, I put my headphones in my ears, I open my phone, and I open the YouTube Music app. Because in the YouTube Music app, I'm able to start on that episode exactly where I left off on my TV, and I'm also able to background it. So both free and premium users can background the YouTube Music app on their phone. So I listen to the episode as I'm walking to work, and then I get to my desk, the episode still isn't done. I could open the YouTube Music app and start watching on my screen, but I want to view it a little bit larger. So I go to youtube.com on my laptop. Once again, I'm able to start the episode exactly where I left off on my phone and finish the episode by watching it on my laptop. So that is kind of how the apps all interact with each other. Again, so long as you're logged into the same account across all these platforms. So then, now let's talk more about YouTube Main. So Some features we've launched that are front-facing are the ones you see behind me. So we now have a destination page for podcasts. We have badging on the search and watch pages, and we also have a dedicated podcast tab on each of your channel pages. But these are just the front-facing features that we've worked on. We've also done a lot to update the algorithm to make sure YouTube is best suited for podcasts. So for example, a lot of podcasts are serialized. So now the next watch, if you're watching a podcast that is serialized, the next episode or even video that'll show up will be the next episode in that series. Additionally, we're also now able to tell, if a user is watching more podcasts in general. So let's say they come on to YouTube and they're not watching a podcast episode. Some of their other recommendations will include other podcasts as well. So now let's talk about YouTube Music, which I feel like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but people are a little bit less familiar with. So podcasts here too can be found across a variety of surfaces. So we have a dedicated podcast discovery page. So you can open your YouTube Music app and click on the little podcast chip at the top, or you can head over to the Explore portion of YouTube Music and also find a podcast there. You can now also filter your searches by either podcast title or episode, so you're easily able to find what you're looking for. Similar to other podcatchers, you can also now follow or subscribe to your favorite shows on YouTube Music as well. So when you open your YouTube Music app, you're easily able to go to that playlist and search for exactly what you're looking for and look into the back catalog, whatever you may want to do with your favorite podcast. And then lastly, as I mentioned again in my morning routine, but want to call it out now, on YouTube Music, you can toggle back and forth between audio and video. And even people who aren't premium subscribers, you can download YouTube Music for free and background podcasts on there, just as you would on any other podcast app. Okay, so I teased this a little before, Living Room. So we're seeing a ton of growth on Living Room. It's actually for YouTube in general, it's our fastest growing surface. So there were actually more than 1 billion hours on average of YouTube content. People watch more than 1 billion hours of average on YouTube content on their TVs every day. Bit of a tongue twister. And we're seeing this trend really extend to podcasting, as I noted with the 400 million number earlier. And we actually directly asked people why they find, Living Room a surface they more frequently want to use now. And our findings have been really interesting. So the one thing they called out is how they want to be entertained in the evening. So they want to get home and instead of listening to it in their headphones, they really want to sit back on the couch, relax and enjoy the show. So you're doing a lot of that. When you're watching in this way too, you're also able to watch with friends. So podcasting historically is more of a solo effort. Again, you stick your headphones in and you're on the go and you're listening, and it's still great for that reason. But what's great now too is you can sit on your couch with your friend, watch. Podcasts often draw a lot of conversation. So this way you're not texting your friend being like, have you even listened yet? They're right there watching with you and you can discuss what they're talking about in real time. And then lastly, as I am very much so not great about, I get very distracted on my phone and on my computer. What's great about the TV is you can turn on the television and have less distractions. You can put your phone down, you can put your laptop down, and really just tune in to whatever podcast episode that's on your TV screen. Okay, great. So I gave you all of the interesting statistics and what we've done to enhance YouTube for podcasts. You've decided you want to put a podcast on the platform. I will take you through some really high-level content strategy to help you get started. So full episodes are the bread and butter of podcasting, and we built podcast features to showcase this. But what's different about podcasts on YouTube, and something you need to think about a little more, is your thumbnail. Your title fits into that same category as well, but thumbnail especially, being it's unique to YouTube, is something you really want to think about. So the first thing you want to decide is have a consistent thumbnail across all your full episodes. This way, when someone opens their YouTube page, they can quickly recognize, oh, that's my favorite podcast. I can see it. I'll click on it that way. So that's something, consistency there will be key. And then you also want to have likely your host face, on that thumbnail, as well if you're a guest-driven show, to also then switch it up pending who the guest is. And then I will say it's oftentimes beneficial for the thumbnail text to not be too wordy, but maybe, have some type of question that really draws audiences in to your podcast. And then in regard to title, I would say our best practice is typically to keep your title the same as the title of the episode would be on your RSS feed. But as time goes and your podcast is on YouTube, you might learn that you might want to tweak it just slightly to be different to both benefit your audiences and, benefit the algorithm as well. But those are two things to really keep in mind as you're uploading to the platform. And then clips are another key differentiator for many podcasts on YouTube. They allow podcasters to not only promote audiences with smaller moments of interest, but you can also then easily link your full episodes to these clips. So when I say clips, I mean both horizontal clips, like the top would be an example of a horizontal clip, and those will show up in your normal YouTube VOD feed. And then we're also recommending and seeing a lot of podcasters utilize our vertical format shorts. And what's great about shorts is you're in a different feed with different people, so you'll likely attract a slightly different audience to your show by utilizing shorts and the shorts feed. And then lastly, I just wanted to show a few examples of some visual styles. So I also apologize if I'm blocking this. So there's not one way to really visualize your podcast, but these are just some of the examples we've seen. I would say, pending on what your podcast ends up being, to look at some of your favorite podcasts and podcasts in a similar genre to see what those folks are doing, because usually what they're doing is working. But I will also say, change it up over time. If one format starts feeling a little stagnant, play around, have fun. Ultimately, once you have an audience, they're going to stick with you and, want to see you evolve as well as they're evolving. So then I just wanted to put in a quick case study of someone who's seen a lot of success on YouTube, and this is Rotten Mango. So Rotten Mango it's a true crime podcast hosted by Stephanie Sue. And Stephanie actually has a long history of being a YouTube creator, but when she started her podcast in 2020, she didn't initially post it to the platform. She was doing audio only across her RSS feed. And then in 2023, she started posting to YouTube. And immediately after she debuted her first video episode in March of 2023, the show gained over 2 million subscribers in just 1 year. And it still averages about 2 million views an episode. So even in this instance, I feel like true crime is something that is what you would think is a bit harder to visualize, but she's an example. She really basically just talks into the camera, and she's drawn in a ton of audiences. Now you'll see, since a couple years ago, she's up now to 4.6 million subscribers and 700 million total channel views. So she's really seeing great success on the platform, which is awesome. And that is it as regard to my presentation. But now it's the main event. So I want everyone to join me in giving a warm welcome to our featured creator. He's a familiar face to many, but beyond the television appearances, he's become a powerhouse in the podcasting world. Nick Viall first captured national attention through his appearances on ABC's The Bachelor franchise, but he's truly made his mark with the Viall Files, a wildly popular podcast that delves into relationships, pop culture, and often offers very direct dating advice. The Viall Files has garnered millions of downloads and consistently tops charts, establishing Nick as a leading voice in podcasting. Beyond his successful podcast, Nick is also a best-selling author with his book Don't Text Your Ex Happy Birthday and other advice on love, sex, and dating, reaching USA Today bestseller status. He is also the founder of Envy Media, a growing media company that is home to podcast newcomers from the Bravo sphere. He has also broadened his media presence, appearing on shows such as Fox's Special Forces and Dancing with the Stars. He's cultivated a reputation for candid insights and his ability to connect with audiences on a deeply personal level. We're really excited to have him here today to share his experiences and perspectives on the world of podcasting. So without further ado, welcome Nick.
Hello, everybody. Here? Great.
Does this one work?
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So for maybe the one person in the audience who doesn't know you, do you want to tell them about yourself?
Well, thank you for the very kind introduction. But yeah, most people knew me originally from being ABC's The Bachelor and a few other iterations that I was a part of. Originally from Wisconsin. My wife and I live in Los Angeles, and we have a 1-year-old daughter. And yeah, we really enjoy what we do and working in the podcast space.
Great. So appropriately then, how did you get started in podcasting?
Well, I started in 2019. I think a lot of people who come off reality TV, you're kind of gifted this platform. You have this following base. I lived in LA. I was doing acting and hosting and kind of just trying to figure out my thing, quite honestly. And I had some friends in the podcast space have some success, and they were, hired as essentially hosts for their podcast. And so I always enjoyed talking. I always enjoyed, I was like the friend who gave relationship advice. I had people call me long-winded, so I was like, oh, long form. And so I felt like I could have some success in it. So ultimately, I ended up starting my podcast and really immediately enjoyed it. I enjoyed the platform, had some early success, and really kind of dove into it and really felt like I found my thing in terms of, building a career on my own outside of being casted on a TV show. Or prior to that, I worked for a company called Salesforce as an account executive. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Salesforce.
We use it.
I really enjoyed working there. So that was really nice to do that, and I felt like immediately I felt the impact that I was having with my audience, and I immediately, even for me, when I was on reality TV, if you watched, for a lot of people, I was the villain on my first season. I was the bad guy on ABC, which doesn't take much on network television. And so to that end, though, when you go on TV, especially in reality TV, you get siloed into a character. It doesn't take much. The people editing the show will decide this is our heroes, these are our quote unquote villains. And so for me, I really enjoyed it because, for the very first time, a lot of people I felt like were actually getting to know me, and instead of a siloed character that was decided by some person, by some producer or some editor in an editing bay, I was able to control my narrative, so to speak, by, on a weekly basis. At the time, it was once a week, dropping anywhere from an hour to 2 hour episode, talking about my views on a variety of different topics. And so I immediately felt the impact in terms of how my audience connected with me for the very first time, because prior to that, it was always feeling like I was battling narratives that were established, a couple of years prior by going on a TV show.
Yeah. That being said, and I know it seems like from the beginning you've changed what the podcast kind of looks like, but have you always recorded with video, or is that a newer venture too?
We always recorded with video. The platform I started my podcast with, for all their faults, they kind of foresaw that and encouraged us to be a multi-channel platform and do audio and video, which immediately noticed the benefits from that. Just because it gave it, YouTube, that's where we launched, our video platform. It was just a completely different audience than the audio platform. And so I just felt like I was, had the opportunity to double dip almost. And even if you would normally listen to a podcast, depending on what we're talking about or the guests I would have, people might listen to it on their commute to work, but then go back and maybe at least watch some of it because they want to maybe see some of the things what we were talking about. And additionally to that, it really helped in terms of making promotional videos and clips and cut downs. And, I think that's another added benefit of just media in general, but specifically the podcast space, is that, I do know like a lot of people, I might, be walking on, and someone might stop me and say, oh, I love your podcast. But, sometimes that might mean some of those people maybe have never actually listened to a full episode, but they consume my show over all the clips and cut downs that we're putting out there. And so it really allows you to, market your show on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, like all the platforms that have various type of video elements to it. And so it really allowed me to, 100% of my marketing in my show was us using the video element of the show to push it out there and promote it. And since we have various iterations of our show, it allowed us to like let me tell my audience the different types of shows that we have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I also think given I imagine much of your initial audience was audience who followed you to your podcast from The Bachelor. So I imagine, those people who are used to seeing you on a TV probably were, wanted to watch you even more so on video.
There was that element as well. And also, I think it gave my show a level of credibility that other podcasts who did audio only didn't have. Because with the video, you have a set then, because like when you tell somebody you have a podcast, I mean, it could mean a million different things. It could mean, one of the biggest platforms in the world where that gets millions of downloads a month, or it can mean like some guy who bought a mic out of his garage, and he's talking to it. So like it really means a variety of different things. But I mean, initially starting with video, we put thought into what our set looked like, and it put thought into like how we conduct the interviews, and even just me as a creator, it made me think, well, I want to compete with late night television. I want to compete with Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon and all the Jimmys. And to that end, like that was just kind of a mental thing I had. But like, just last year, Vulture magazine named my show the new late night of alternative media, which was like a really, it felt good to hear that. But I really believe that like having that video component early planted that seed in my mind to treat my show as if it was, in the same playing field as some of these other shows. It wasn't at the time, but it very much now is today.
Totally. That being said, so similar to these different late night shows, one of your formats is where you're often having guests on. So how often, especially even in the beginning, I'd say versus now would be interesting to talk about as well, but how often are you going out and pitching to guests versus how much are the guests coming to you?
It's very much like dating, you want the people you can't have, and the people who want you, you're like, I'm not so sure. It's very much like that. And so,
I know about half of that, not your half.
And so, yes, I've always, no one's cared about my show more than me. I very much hustle. At first I was, it was kind of me doing it by myself. I've been able to grow as a show and therefore be able to grow my team and resources. But I have a full booking staff. I have producers who work for me, and we're constantly, trying to get the best gets, because we move fast. And I think you have to move fast to have a successful show. I think when people used to start podcasts a few years back, especially if it was like a public figure of any kind, they would treat podcasting as like a side project, it'd be some sort of way to like have an ancillary income and just talking to a mic and whatever will make some extra money. So what they would do is they would like batch episodes. They'd get together, get a couple of their friends, and they would batch, would sit down and maybe fly to LA, fly to New York and try to get wrangle up as much talent as they could and record 4 to 5 episodes for 3 days in a row and batch them. And it's just like, that's just a recipe for not being successful, because one, just recording the quality of the show is far less, by episode 3 or 4 than it is episode 1, 2. You're not talking about relevant things. You're not staying, with the times. And so you really have to do that.
It's interesting you say that, because not to get off topic, a certain comedian still just did the podcast circuit, and I really like said comedian. So I went to each of the podcasts to listen to, her on each of these podcasts. And she was telling the same stories on each podcast, which I think to some extent makes sense, because maybe each of the podcasts had slightly different audiences. So she was reaching different people. But if you're just following the guest, it doesn't really make sense, because you're getting more or less a lot of the same thing each time.
Yeah. And to your point, I think with some comedians, it makes sense because they have a bit and they're trying out this bit for their tour and things like that. But to your point, I think that is more of approach of traditional media of like kind of doing the rounds. And I think podcast is a space that really desires authenticity. I treat, especially when I have guests, and I have certain guests who kind of will ask like, what's the goal here, and, especially if I have a more high profile guest that's maybe doing this for the first time and they're kind of unfamiliar with this space. And I try to tell them like, my goal is, I want everyone listening to the show to feel like they're in the room with us having a conversation. I'm not interviewing you per se. I want it to feel like we're two friends talking about whatever what do you want to talk about? Like I have some questions, I have some things I want to talk about, but I want them to feel like they're in the room with us because that's going to make them feel connected to us. We talk a lot of pop culture, a lot of relationships, and I always tell the publicists that we're talking to, especially if we're like pitching like bigger talent, it's like nothing will endure my audience to your clients more than them talking about the same thing my audience enjoys. And it really doesn't matter what it is. Are they a mom? Are they a dad? Do they, do they like cooking? Are they into sports? Do they like the same TV shows? We talk about a lot of TV shows. And so, the internet goes wild when a public figure comes on. People recently have been freaking out about Ben Stiller tweeting about housewives, and that just makes people love Ben Stiller more because if you watch Housewives and you think, oh, he also is curious about Dorit and Kyle's relationship, it makes him feel like a human being as opposed to this fancy A-list director, and immediately you feel more connected to that person. And I think that's truly what podcast does, regardless of what the medium's about.
Totally. Ben Stiller also just tweeted Nick's win from the Oscars. So he wasn't paying attention when he was at the Oscars. He was on the phone watching the Knicks. So he's always tweeting something interesting. But to that aside, so when you're having a guest on the show, ideally, obviously, they're both timely and interesting. But maybe sometimes you have someone who's maybe just timely, or you have someone who's just kind of interesting, but nothing's currently like going on consistently about them in the media. How do you approach those different types of guests?
Well, if it's we have again two different formats. We have what we call a reality recap, which is like your variety show, like you call it late night television that has multiple guests, or a GMA, or things like that. And so those shows will have multiple guests. There'll be parts of the show that don't have guests, and we're talking about various topics. And we'll pitch to people as this, like, if you're promoting a movie, if you're promoting, a project, we might have them come on for 10 or 15 minutes and play a game, have some fun. It really just depends what they're trying to accomplish. But ultimately, I'd say the goal is still the same thing, whether it's a 10-minute interview or a 90-minute interview. When we have our like long form going deeper, which is like a sit down with a one guest, and we really just kind of talk to that person and really want them make them feel like they're in the room. That is the goal. It's just to humanize them in a way that that I don't think legacy media humanizes people. I think it's, legacy media has turned into, I think in an attempt to try to compete with our space, I think legacy media has kind of, tried to deliver the news and entertainment and clicks and headlines and things like that. And I think it's gotten oversaturated. And so I think for the people who do go on shows like mine, you might be able to reach more people with a viral clip like on TikTok or Instagram. But for the people who are sitting down and listening to an hour or 90 minutes with this person, I think the stickiness that gives my audience to that person is uncomparable, because it's hard to listen to, there's a lot of people who've, the Joe Rogan and Trump podcast was obviously highly talked about. And I think regardless of what you felt about the person, you were told he's this one thing, and then you got to listen to 3 hours of it. It became less about policy and more about like, I don't know, it kind of seemed, at least he seems like a human being for some people. And I think that just changed a lot of the narratives. And I think it confused a lot of people because he was delivered and packaged in one way. And then hearing him speak for 3 hours in another way was just like kind of eye-opening for people. Even if it was just confusing for people, it was something different. And I think, again, that, people are, I think we now have a landscape of people don't know what to trust when it comes to media in general. And so you kind of just have to trust your gut, and you have to trust your eyes and your ears, your instincts. And it's more information in a long form because it's not delivered to you in headlines. It's not delivered to you in what feels like a bias. You really can judge for yourself by just listening to two people have a conversation rather than one person interrogating another person and some person answering those questions.
Totally. What's also great is I feel like people, in regard to traditional media, it's regardless of what side of the aisle you're going, if you're just an entertainment figure, whatever it might be, you're going into a traditional media setting with your own biases, whatever that might be. And I feel like, obviously, people have biases about everything, but I feel like there's these less rigid ideas going into a podcast versus going into like a traditional media space before you go into it. So that being said, with a lot of people not trusting the media now, how do you get your guests to really trust you and feel comfortable?
Well, I always tell my guests I'm not the news. I'm an entertainer, and we're not trying to gotcha anyone. I for the most part will tell them what I want to talk to them about, what questions they might have. Within reason, we'll listen to notes they might have, because again, I don't have the responsibility of a news organization. My goal isn't to report on a story. My goal is to just show a human being and just sit in a conversation. And so, I'm not trying to ruin anyone's day.
Totally.
I'm not trying to paint, show a bias. I just want them talking to me, and let my audience decide for themselves what they think of that person. And so, yeah, there's a level of trust that we're trying to, establish and say, just come on, talk. And I want my guests to love the experience. I want them to love what we talked about and feel good about it. Of course, I can't guarantee. I have a large enough audience that I can't guarantee them that everyone listening is going to love what they hear. I can't guarantee them that everyone's going to agree with them. But what I can guarantee them is a platform and a space to get whatever they want out. And it's like you give someone 3 minutes to have a discussion. You're like, well, should I say this or should I say that? You don't have time for nuance. You really got to get your points across. You got to hit it hard. And then it's just like, and then you get done with those short interviews. It's like, well, did I articulate that very well? And I'm not really sure that it's it's like you have time in a long form to, kind of go down a rant or whatever and bring it back, and you can get in the nuance of a point or a discussion, and you can really get into the weeds of things, and people can kind of come along with you. And again, they feel more connected to that conversation, especially if they're sitting and listening in their car or on their walk to work. And I really think it just allows people to feel more connected to that platform than, say, other traditional ones.
Totally. So when you talk about your audiences, obviously, when you're having a more controversial figure who's very timely on the podcast, your audience want the hard-hitting questions, so you're ultimately going to ask your guests the hard-hitting questions. How do you ease your way into that? Is there a best practice that you kind of use?
Yeah, I when I got into podcasting, I was listening to Conan O'Brien interview Howard Stern, and he kind of asked him a similar question, and Howard kind of talked about how just makes them feel good about themselves, kind of gasses them up, especially if he's a fan of them, lets them know he's a fan. You just got to get someone talking,
Totally.
And, the first 5 minutes of a podcast interview are usually never the best. They shouldn't be, because usually that person will get more comfortable, and that's the benefit of a long form. I think if you are being interviewed, if you are a guest, you do want to stay on your toes, because all of a sudden you get a little loose, you get a little comfortable, and next thing you know, you're kind of rambling on, and you're like, what did I say, kind of thing. But to that point, that's the thing. You're not trying to interrogate them. You just kind of I love starting an episode by just bringing up some random topic and get them talking, and I want to know what they're passionate about. I want to know what they're interested in. What are they thinking about, or what are they talking about with their friends recently, or what's something that happened at home that they've been spending a lot of their mental energy on, and things like that. And the more they feel comfortable and the more you can relate to them, if my guest offers some kind of vulnerability or they tell a story, if I'm able to relate to that, I try to relate to it. I try, or if my guest is, a little cagey, or, you feel like I'm getting shorter answers, I will try to share something from myself, or,
Totally.
I like to ask a question by saying, well, something I've experienced in the past, yada, 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 yada. Is that something you can relate to? Yes or no? And by me offering that to them, it does, applies a little pressure to be like, well, I gave you this, I got to give something
more
back, and so there's a little bit of that, but yeah, ultimately I very much try with my guests to, I have to work with, it has to be a trusting relationship. I'm not going to get guests that I want by burning bridges and things like that. And that's, also not my show to be the hard-hitting news reporter and things like that. So that's not what we're trying to do. And there's not an expectation from my audience to do that. Well, for most of them, depend on, you have a large enough audience, people have all different kinds of expectations that surprise you. But yeah, you just kind of, you want to make them feel comfortable. You want to get them talking and kind of just see where it goes.
Yeah. Have you found ever that like you have a guest who comes on, they're super nervous and you're kind of like, crap, this isn't going to be great. I'm not going to get much out of them. But does it ever, how often does it like change on the flip side of that where it ends up being like one of your best guests ever?
I've never really been super disappointed except for one time. His name
I'd
is
love to know who, but you can tell me later.
But yeah, I think for that most part, yeah, that's what I love about the space, because it's really hard to be completely inauthentic, in that long of a format. And some people give more than others, but I feel like, we talk, our episodes are pretty long. So, and I keep digging, and I feel like I've developed the ability to read my, people in general and read my guests a little bit. And the trick is, if you really make them feel seen and you bring yourself to their level, if you can relate to them, they always tend to open up a little bit. And again, some of my favorite people to interview are the ones that are, I guess, more controversial, because it's impossible for that guest to come in when my audience has a very specific POV of who they are and what they represent. It's almost never exactly what that person is. And then when you get that person in a room for a period of time, it's really cool to see people like, I didn't realize this, or I never considered that, or I my POV has changed, or it's like, I'm not sure if I like that person yet, but like, I definitely changed my point of view a little bit, type of thing. And so to know that you are moving, I've never done an episode where I didn't feel like I moved the needle in some way. And I don't think a lot of shows can say that.
Yeah, you changed my POV on someone a couple weeks ago, but now the season of the reality show is on again, and I'm back to where I was. But I have still in the back of my head, like, they are human, so got to give them some grace there. But that being said, too, what kind of feedback do you get from your guests typically after being on your show?
From my guests?
Yeah.
For the vast majority, it's very positive, because I think sometimes there is a lot of nervousness, like I said before. I mean, you have to be on your toes. Like, publicists are terrified of long form because they feel like they lose control, right? They want things to be, in shorter sound bites. And I just think, to me, I think that's an old way of thinking. It's less effective, but like it's upon us to like build that trust, and build those relationships. But yeah, a lot of times people do come in a little nervous, afraid of saying the wrong thing. And like I said to them, it's just like, listen, that's not my goal. It's not to, if you say what you think is the wrong thing, then we'll take it out, I'm not trying to get you. And so to that end, I think most people don't ask to have things taken out. And for that, and to that end, I think they do feel, like they got to be themselves and they got their message out. And I think a lot of people are surprised that the expectation was a lot more pleasant. The result was a lot more pleasant than the expectation they came in with.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have oftentimes, like, I know you said you don't really read your DMs, but is your audience is coming to you often to be like, you really changed my perception of XYZ person? And then is the audience, from what they tell you, is the audience is also going to said guest? And are they getting messages like, my perception of you really changed?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, that happens all the time. It might get, I do pay less and less attention to comments and DMs because I just think it handcuffs you creatively. But yes, it's very common for my guests to reach out and thank me for the opportunity because they really feel like people heard them, and sometimes for the first time, especially, a reality TV star whose producers they work, I guess, essentially for, have decided who they are and decided what character they are and decided what their personality traits are. And there's truth to it. Like when I was the villain on ABC, you saw I guess, sides of me. You also saw it with like music in the background and, certain things to like frame a sentiment. But, it wasn't like I wasn't acting and I was doing that thing they showed me doing, but like the context was very much, changed and the intensity was amplified and things like that. So,
And they keep you up all night.
yeah. And so that's just like, that's more of a production element. But yeah, you really sometimes feel like when I was my first time on TV, I felt like people thought one thing of me and I felt like that is not who I am, and I found myself with, people I'd meet on the street or fans who would approach me almost like one by one trying to change opinions of me. And I finally realized that was ridiculous. But, what a platform like a podcast allows you to do is have a much greater reach to do just that. And it's way more, it's incredibly effective.
Yeah, it really is. And in that sense, you've really expanded your popularity and your show's popularity by starting NV Media and bringing on, different hosts from reality television to start podcasts. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and so we worked really hard to make the Viall Files what it is today, and I think me and my team have really leaned into using video as a way to market the show, and just the way that I produce my show, I felt like we had a proven track record and a recipe for success, and I wanted to apply that to other creators and start producing other shows, and so yeah, NV Media is. We focus on pop culture and relationships and things like that. And so all the shows that we develop are kind of in that space. I look at NV Media as like the ESPN and the Viall Files as the sports center of pop culture and relationships. And the shows that we are producing and developing are your spinoffs like NFL Live or First Take or things like that. But they're all connected. Like ESPN's connected through sports and my shows are connected through pop culture and reality TV.
Cool. So now that you've hired these folks, what advice are they coming to you for?
Really just like how to produce the show and how to be effective. I'm very much, the people I work with, I want them to be dedicated. I want them to be as passionate as I am about creating the show. But and to that end, I need them showing up on a consistent basis. You can't batch things, and in an oversaturated market because there's a lot of podcasts out there because the barrier to entry is a few bucks. You really have to set yourself apart, and the easiest way to get people interested in what you're talking about is to talk about things they're interested in hearing about. And because before it was like, oh, I'm just gonna like get together with my friends and we'll talk about being like what we did last week. And like that might make one good episode, but what are you doing on your 10th episode? Most of our lives aren't that interesting, and then, even if they are, how much of that life do you want to really put out there?
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to find what your passions are, what your interests are, be it politics, be it relationships, be it true crime, and have those conversations and discussions about the very same thing that people are talking about with their colleagues and their friends at home, at work, and things like that, and be a part of the conversation. And then hopefully you're delivering a POV that people are inspired by. I always tell my team, we don't care if people agree with us or disagree with us. We just care that they care. We care that they're invested. And if we're able to do that, we're able to grow.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. So I've asked all of my questions. My one last question for you before we hand it over to the audience is just, what would be your best piece of advice to someone looking to start a podcast?
I guess just what I said that last part is you really have to be committed. It's not a side project if you really want to be successful. I think the only reason you would treat it like a side project, I think podcasting, if, for example, if I don't know who's who in the room or who you guys represent, but if you say have a political figure you're working for, I think if they started a podcast, I think that's a great, might not know what your size of your audience might be, just because you're a big deal doesn't necessarily, there's been a lot of big public figures who have very unsuccessful podcasts because it doesn't necessarily resonate because it takes a level of passion, dedication, and consistency to grow that. But even if you have a small podcast, it could be just a place for your constituent, you know what I'm trying to say, or your fans to, if they want to really know who you are and what you represent, you can give them that long form media to really feel like they're in the room with you. And then if you really want to get your message out, you can try to become a guest on maybe a larger platform that maybe has, to talks about the stuff that you want to talk about and things like that. But more than anything, consistency, timeliness, relevancy, and sticking with it. And most people treat it like a side project. Most people, if you're
Then they learn it's a lot of work.
Yeah, if you're gonna drop something every other week, or and that's the thing. We have a schedule. We have a recording schedule. We don't drop our podcast sometimes on Tuesdays and sometimes on Fridays and sometimes in the middle of the night. And things like that. People know when we're going to show up. We know. And because that they know where to go to get us, as opposed to if you're just dropping it sporadically, they're going to find someone else, And so I would say that's more than anything, that's the biggest thing of being successful.
I'd agree. On YouTube too, especially, consistency is going to be key there as well. I want to hand it over now to the audience. If anyone has questions for Nick.
These are our mics, so we'll toss them to you. You'll hold them like this. All right.
Hey, Nick. Thanks for being here. Just a question. I work for a politician. We're kind of trying to break into spaces that aren't political, that are like similar to your podcast. And I'm on the booking side of things. So like when we're reaching out to like a podcast like yours, or yours is a larger one, so larger ones as well that like aren't in the political space and are just kind of more in the culture space. Like, what do you look for in a guest? And is there kind of like a trick when working with bookers, like to appeal to them? To get on shows?
My show's very apolitical. Sometimes I wish I had the guts to talk politics, but also we used to dabble a little bit on topics here or there, and then it was just there's so many other podcasts out there that are political. Like there are people who really need a space to just I need to check out, and that's what we bring. And so to that end, we recently had Meghan McCain on the show. But we were very much like, we don't talk politics. And if you want to talk about what we want to talk about, we'd be interested in having you on. And she was. And so we didn't, it definitely was a little nervous, but it actually went great. I'm not, I don't really audit my comments all that much. I'm sure I ruffled a few feathers, but ultimately I didn't really notice it. It didn't create many waves. But I think you have to, I think it's very smart for that Meghan did that, in a sense that again, it doesn't matter if she's talking policy or whatever, things like that. But I guarantee you, there are people who listen to that interview with Meghan. Maybe they didn't even know who she was, and maybe they didn't even know what side of the aisle she was, but they might have liked her takes on Bravo, and they just. And now that's just if they have the same opinion about a character on a TV show, we very much live in a time where people don't believe what's true. They believe who they like the most, and that's often not for the better, but it is the reality of the situation. And so if you want to connect with the politicians you work for, connect with a broader audience, I would say, be okay with not talking policy and not talking politics. You're trying to connect with people on a human level. And so allow those shows that are good to do that, have that, because I think sometimes I've gotten resistance from people being like, well, but they really want to come on and they want to give their message and they want to at the end, can they at least, pitch blah, blah, blah. And it's just no. And if they're willing to do that, I promise it's going to be a lot more effective. It's a little covert, I guess, but I do think it allows them to connect with your audience a lot. Connect with my audience or their audience in a lot more of an effective way.
I'm sure Megan's experience on your podcast was a lot different than her time on The View.
Yes.
Thanks. Hi, Nick.
Hello.
I'm Maria, Wisconsinite here.
Oh, wonderful.
I have two questions, one about podcasting, one about Wisconsin. First question about podcasting. Of course, during the election, we saw President Trump, we saw Kamala Harris go on very large podcasts. I want you to talk a little bit about the space that might be open for maybe the member of Congress from Wisconsin or somebody that maybe isn't as high profile, but what does that space look like for different types of politicians? And then on the Wisconsin side, what's the best part about being from Wisconsin? Go Pack.
Yes, obviously the Packers. I'm a diehard. Well, I guess I would say just kind of extension of my last question. I think, there are a lot of options out there for podcast wise. And, for shows like mine that are apolitical, I think it's sometimes just for me when I'm booking guests, it's a balancing act of trying to maybe like spread a booking like Meghan McCain around, non-political guests or things like that. But I do think it's really cool, like for a show like mine, to have a senator or a congressman or congresswoman on, because again, I have a lot of fun humanizing people, and some of the, I think politicians now more than ever are very much dehumanized to your average citizen, and so I think it's just finding the right balance. I think if you're trying to get them on shows like mine, there has to be a level of, pitching on your side of things. But like if they can show personality, and I think that's where it can be mutually beneficial. I think that whoever you're pitching has to be able to be a human and talk about interests outside of policy and politics. But if the result of someone, because the shock value is there, and that's what I love, right? I love to have someone where people come in with one POV and leave with another. And so it's very easy to have a politician on because there's always a POV. It's always strong. And if I'm able to humanize them in a way, the only cost for me is sometimes, if you're on the other side, people don't like it when you humanize people they don't like. So, but, we deal with that because, again, it just keeps people invested and engaged. So it's a balancing act, but I think you just need to have, it's got to be from both sides, kind of trying to find that sweet spot. But I think there's a lot of options out there. You just got to find the shows that are comfortable with having, various politicians on. And then Wisconsin, like the lakes. I would say, other than being a Packer fan, I was lucky enough to buy my grandfather's lake house back that we lost years ago and give it back to my mom and dad. So that was a very special moment, and it's a very beautiful place, and there's no place like it. So, yeah. It's private. Yeah.
Hello. Thanks for being here. Thanks for putting the event on. How far in advance do you plan your content? Or like, is it just guest by guest? Do you kind of try to hit a moment?
Not much. And honestly, that makes my job a lot easier because it really just I don't try to get too far ahead because news is so fast, and it may not be like political news, but even pop culture news, and that's sometimes it shocks me, right? I'm going to bed, going into a weekend, and we got 3 shows lined up, and I haven't really put much thought into like what I'm going to talk about, because I either haven't watched the shows that we're going to discuss, or I don't know what news is going to break. But that's what, it's like, work smart, not hard. Again, a lot of people are just like, what should we talk about? And you're right. It gets really hard after like 10 episodes to think of something to talk about, and so I just allow the news to break, and I allow the shows to come out, and then I consume them, and then in that I start thinking about, I'm willing to share a POV, and I'm a lot, and I think a strength of mine, and I think why I've been able to separate myself from specifically like all the people on The Bachelor had a podcast, or most of them. And I think I've been able to separate myself partly because, my personality is what caused me to be the villain in ABC The Bachelor. But that same personality allowed me to speak more freely and be comfortable with being criticized for my opinion, where some of my peers who really enjoyed the benefits of being the fan favorite were like, I don't know if I want to mess with that, you know? And so I'm just willing to share my opinion, allow people to disagree with it, not be offended if they do, and not get too hyped up when people do agree with it. And I go about my day, and yeah, I don't put much. I know the structure, and I know I know what lanes we'll be in, but in terms of the actual messaging, it's a very, very, very little lead time up until when we were recording.
Hey, Nick. I'm Joel. Thank you for sharing your insight. I work with an advocacy organization that is trying to grow engagement on long form. And one of the challenges is that we have a very small team. Mm-hmm. Like, this is my team, very scrappy, small team. And I'm curious to know this kind of the size of your team when you started and where is it now, and also, as you grew, as your team grew, what was the partner that you found most strategic outside of the bare bones? The camera, the editor, the talent in front of the camera. What partner did you find really maybe you weren't expecting? Oh, this person really is key to the success of the show.
Great questions. At first, it was me, and I was given a producer who worked for the company that produced my show, and in addition to producing my show, they produced other shows. So I was essentially given a part-time employee to help produce my show. They also had other resources and editors and things like that, but it was mostly me. And I got a lot done with that because at the end of the day, like, I was willing to show up and talk and put it out there. And then, once it's like you reach a certain point where I feel like, I growth slowed down a little bit. So it was more like, well, how do I want to keep growing, and that's when I started, we made a little money. I felt like I was in a position to start reinvesting that, because at first it was like, oh, great, I'm finally making some money. And so I first hired 2 part-time employees as kind of social media managers. And that kind of organically grew. And then those 2 part-time employees became full-time employees. I left the organization that I was originally at and started producing the show on my own. I brought in people, I had some turnover with that company and producers who worked on my show, and I brought over one person. So then I had a team of 3 full-time employees for a period of time. Now I have about 10 full-time employees. And again, now we're doing multiple shows a week on my show. And so our show has grown, both just audience members, but the frequency in which we put out shows, the content, before I would never put out clips and things like that. Now we're posting 10 or 15 a day or something like that, and making sizzle reels and things like that. And, I tell my, it's what's fun though, is I still only have a team of 10. It's relatively small, like yours. But I do think with the technology, we really try to invest in technology, and we're trying to keep up with AI, even though it's still not where I would like it to be in terms of helping in the podcast space. But I always tell my team, if ABC can do it, we can do it. If Warner Brothers can make a promotional video that everyone's talking about, so can we. And it's true, we can. When we had the most recent Bachelor on, we were his first interview, and I have a nice relationship with ABC given my time on the show. But we did this montage that was very much like if you've seen the movie Mean Girls, when Regina George comes out and they're like, I've never heard about Regina George. Well, instead of all these kids from high school, I asked some of my celebrity friends to do a little, and we made a spoof off of that. And I had the Rob Mills, the head of unscripted for Hulu, Disney, and ABC, personally reach out to me and be like, wow, I wish we did stuff like that. And so you really can, if you are creative, you can do a lot with a small team. utilizing technology, and I find that, like, the larger your team gets, the harder it is to, like, instill creativity. Sometimes, sometimes people can go through their motions when they get when you give them a job and they kind of just do their job. And when you have a small team, it's kind of all hands on deck, as you guys know. And so I think with that, I've been able to pull a lot of creativity from my team, and we've been able to look much larger as a team than we actually are by utilizing technology available to us.
All right, we've got one online.
We have a question from a virtual attendee. Is there anyone in particular you would love to get on your podcast, a dream guest?
So many. I've said it a lot over the years. Martha Stewart comes to mind. She'd be fun. Probably Lana Del Rey would be very interesting, just because she's not, to my knowledge, done a long form. I find her to be very fascinating, and I think if you got her into a room on a mic, it would be, a wild ride. And I'd like to be a part of that journey. Ryan Reynolds is someone I've always wanted on my show. I would think Harry Styles would be great. So those would be a lot of, in terms of those would be some names that come to mind that I'd really like to have on, because again, that is something in terms of, for us, that we're trying to elevate, right? I started as a reality TV star. I always say that, and what benefited me is I realized early, coming from reality TV, that it gave me incredible access, but it also gave me no credibility. So I could get into many rooms because a lot of these, executives in Hollywood were fans of The Bachelor, and so as the average person who moves to Hollywood, so to speak, they can't get representation. They can't meet with a casting director. I'm getting general meetings with, heads of executives, but they're not trying to work with me. They just want to ask about the show. But I was still in the room with that person, and so I understood that if I could just be in the room, I could surprise them, with what I might talk about. And I would never ask for a favor. I would ask for advice, and sometimes a favor would come. But to that end, so now we're trying to work and continue to elevate our guests. And, again, I'm really trying to pitch that we can offer your clients and these celebrities a lens from our audience in ways that they just don't have right now. They have to be willing to talk more long form and do something that's a little less traditional, but the connectedness and the stickiness that, your client's going to have with my audience, I think is truly incomparable. And I think it's hard to replicate in any other format.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and then Nick will be around after we wrap, so don't worry.
I get to hold the football. This is very cool. Given we're in Washington, a lot of famous people have come through town, whether you're looking at JFK or Martin Luther King. If you could go back through history and choose one person to interview on your show, who would it be?
Marilyn Monroe, maybe. We that's the first person that came to mind, just because I think there's a lot of questions about, her life and all the access she had, and all the, how connected she was with people in positions of power and sports and things like that. So I think maybe Marilyn Monroe would come to mind, just because we operate in the pop culture space. Is there anyone else that, that's a good question. JFK would be really cool. If he would be willing not to talk politics. I'll go with those two. Yeah.
Maybe together.
Maybe together. I'd sing him happy birthday.
All right.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick, for being here. We are now going to move on to the next part of our programming.
Thank you,
But
everybody.
we will both, I don't know if anyone wants to talk to me, but we'll both be at the reception after this wraps.
would definitely listen to a podcast with Marilyn Monroe, and I have to ask about the dress, and then I'd want to know what she thought about Kim Kardashian wearing the dress.
I have infinite thoughts. I have infinite questions. I would love that.
So less exciting, but probably more important for this group. I'm Carly Eason, as I mentioned earlier. I'm here with my colleague, Emily Keller. I work with Right of Center partners as well as the federal government here in the U.S.
And as Carly mentioned, my name is Emily Keller. I work with left of center partners and elected Democrats and candidates for office throughout the United States.
And this is a picture of me many years and many spray tans ago. Okay, so you've heard a lot about the power of podcasting on YouTube. You've heard a lot about how to connect with audiences and the power of what you can do with long-form content. Podcast episodes and clips on YouTube live long beyond those 15 minutes of fame, and the half-life of a good episode well outperforms and outlasts that of a traditional press hit. Having your boss on CNN, on, Good Morning America, that lasts for maybe a few days, but that podcast episode on YouTube is going to live forever. So today we're going to help you decide whether you should brave the podcast charts on your own or integrate podcasts as part of your media strategy as a guest.
So we're going to start with creating your own podcast. They're just such a powerful and emerging tool for civic partners, including we have some new one, old and new.
Yeah, so many of you may be familiar with Senator Cruz's podcast that he launched in 2020, giving his unique personality and POV on current events, hosting fellow lawmakers and guests, and analyzing topics and bills. He just did a budget breakdown on the verdict.
And Governor Newsom launched a podcast literally today. And breaking news, the screenshot is from Spotify, but he is on YouTube as of 2 hours ago. A huge win for me personally. I will accept your congratulations after the programming. His first episode is with Charlie Kirk. So
also a YouTube partner.
Also a very important YouTube partner. He announced his own podcast so that he can have conflicting POVs and have complex and far-ranging conversations with people from different backgrounds. So very excited to see how this goes. But you too, if you go to YouTube at This is Gavin Newsom, you can also be one of the first subscribers. I was subscriber number 2, so you can't really beat me. But creating your own podcast does give you the power to build, elevate, grow your own brand, and not have to deal with traditional media gatekeepers.
So nothing that is worth doing doesn't have risk. And I think especially in this space and building off of what Nick said, you have to be willing to be a little uncomfortable to get that magic to happen. And so we kind of outlined here some of the risks and the rewards of hosting your own podcast if you are in the civic space.
Yeah. So, it is time intensive. We all know, digital directors, communications directors, you all have 5,000 things to do in a day. And production does take time and care, as you heard from Nick. And, you need some dedicated time with your principal. That can be a challenge, as we all know. You'll need time to get them to sit down in front of the camera, in front of the microphone. And you have to be able to do that consistently in order to make your podcast successful. And it does take time. You have to build your own audience, and that's labor intensive. It's a resource investment, and you have to be consistent in order to be successful. But if you're willing to risk it, you can get the reward.
So obviously we see so many podcasters emerging as, competitors to traditional news and traditional media. But some of the things that you get to do when you create your own podcast is it's your voice, it's your brand, it's your style, it's your POV, and it's your flavor. And people get to really know what that is. You also get total ownership. So you're not having to worry about what questions am I going to be asked? When am I going to be asked them? Do we have to talk about that time when my hair looked insane and my toupee was on the other side of the room? If you don't want to talk about it, it's your podcast. You don't have to. Obviously, being authentic is key, but you do have that total ownership. You also get to have ownership over the production, the set, the look and feel. If you want it to be really serious, because you're really serious and your boss is a policy wonk, be serious. If your boss is actually secretly really funny, be funny, and you can have that ownership over what the tone is. You get to build your own community. And I think, Nick will say this, but I think so many of our creators at YouTube have said these online communities become IRL communities. These activate for book clubs and tours, and they buy merch and they purchase books and they go see you in movies and they come for live shows. And that all can translate in politics to votes, fundraising, appointees, coming to your rallies, and also taking action, whether that's signing petitions or getting behind your movement. You do get to bypass traditional news formats and get your message across with the timeliness. I think that's something else that they just chatted about, which is that batching videos doesn't work. It's stale. You get to be timely. You don't have to wait for someone to agree to get you on the show. You don't have to wait for, New York Times to write back to you and say, yeah, now's a good time for us to run this story about freshman congressman from Georgia. You can do it today. There's nothing from stopping you. And then you do have a huge amount of endless ability to elevate your national profile and your visibility. If you put in the work and you put in the effort and you are authentic, you will find an audience well beyond what you might traditionally have on either print or broadcast media. So a little bit about how to get started with your podcast. You can do that in YouTube Studio. You got to get started. You got to start somewhere. You have kind of some options here about how you can launch your podcast. So you can either, if you have an existing channel, most politicians, right, are going to have a campaign channel and an official channel. Different organizations may have an official channel that's already out there. You may want to go ahead and leverage that channel because you have a good amount of following, or you might want to start a brand specific podcast channel that's exclusive to the podcast that you're launching. So to date, we really haven't found any data that aligns with one specific strategy here at YouTube. So we'll just kind of talk through the two options that you have and give you that information to empower you to make that decision.
Yeah, so you can start on your existing channel. This allows you to kind of take advantage of the audience that you've already built. So if your podcast is new, relatively new, you don't have an established audience, you can take advantage of the audience you've already built on YouTube. And, if your podcast audience and current channel audience are similar, you're going to be talking about similar content. It's going to be thematic. Might make sense to make sure that podcast is on the channel you've built already. If the podcast is viewed as an additional piece of content, an extension of the channel and content strategy, i.e. it's like a weekly recurring piece of content that will help with what already exists on your channel, going with the channel you already have might be the way to go. And if they're already similar to your channel's content, style, what you're already doing, don't start from scratch. You might want to go with your existing channel.
Yeah, something to think about there is your channel just a bunch of floor speeches that no one's watched, but you over time picked up 5,000 subs? Okay, well, is my new content going to be a huge departure from that, or is it going to be pretty similar? Starting over on a new channel can be daunting, but if your podcast has an established audience, maybe you're audio only because you live in 2011 and you think that that's so normal, you can start a new channel that people are going to seek out your specific podcast branding on YouTube via video. If the audience is completely different, right? Like say maybe you work in an organization where you had a principal who was a member of Congress or an elected official, and they've just retired or they've stepped down and they're launching a new era of their brand with your organization. It would definitely make sense to start a fresh channel there. If your existing channel is content rich and the podcast is completely different, so unlikely with this group, but if you're a vlogger and all you do is vlog and then on podcast you're going to be talking about the news, probably not the right fit. You can always link to your new channel on your main YouTube channel. And the podcast is struggling to reach a consistent audience on the existing channel. If you give it a go, you can always do a transfer and we can move the content over to a new channel. Emily has a special compliance flag for you.
Yes. If you do work for an elected official, are you yourself an elected official? Make sure you are talking to legal about compliance. Maybe you do need a dedicated channel. If you're working with a partner like iHeart, aka Gavin Newsom, maybe you need another channel for compliance reasons, but also continuity reasons. If you lose an election, perhaps, or run for a new office, you don't always get to take your YouTube channel with you. So if the podcast is going to be something that lives beyond the office you serve in currently, you might want to think about having a dedicated channel for it.
So this is a little bit of like the nitty gritty, and we're not going to read over these slides in whole. This is recorded and we'll send them out to you after. But
Yeah.
in YouTube Studio, just like you do normally when you're uploading your scintillating speeches and really clever and creative shorts that I know you're working very hard on, within YouTube Studio, you can create a new podcast, give it its own channel branding, which is incredibly important. Packaging and how you think about users interacting with your podcast, whether that's on YouTube main, in the living room, on desktop, or in YouTube Music is really important. And then you'll have a podcast tab on your YouTube channel. You can do the same if you already have the RSS feed, and I'll let Emily give some flags on that.
Yeah, so you have the ability to create a podcast both with an existing playlist, a new playlist, or your RSS feed. This is your vegetables of how to do that. If you already have a playlist for your podcast, you're good to go. But here you can see right here in this lovely animated graphic how you can enter your RSS feed. So if you are someone putting your podcast out traditionally to other platforms, YouTube can now be included in that as well.
If you have been putting out your podcast on YouTube already, but it's not designated as a podcast, there's a solution for that too.
Yeah, so you can convert your playlist to a podcast. It's so simple. You just set as podcast, and there you go. It'll be a podcast available in YouTube Music and YouTube Main.
So like Emily said, podcasts are playlists on YouTube. What you might think of as a podcast feed on Spotify or Apple, that's just a playlist on YouTube that comes up on your channel page. It shows up in the YouTube Music surface. And in your case, it'll be a new playlist that you set up for just podcasting. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Importantly, podcasting, and when you designate your content as a podcast, you get access to additional analytics for that podcast. So just like I'm sure you spend hours upon hours in YouTube Studio Analytics looking at your traffic sources and your click-through rate and what's making your videos perform and which thumbnails are attracting the most viewers, you now will have options to look at the analytics for your podcast as a whole, as well as episode by episode. So especially with branding, remember to consider thumbnails and titles for your pod and how they fit into your overall channel branding. If you have a color scheme from your campaign logo that you carried over to the official side, consider creating a pod watermark that includes that branding but isn't identical. Okay, pathway number 2.
Got to become a podcast guest. If that's too labor intensive, you're a little afraid of being your own podcast host, you don't want to start a new show, you can go beyond your traditional hit. You don't have to go on CNN. You can become a podcast guest.
Yeah, so going beyond being on Fox and Friends or making a trip to see Anderson Cooper, maybe you're a freshman congressman and they don't really want to book you yet. Like your star isn't big enough for them. There's definitely a podcast that's interested in having you on their show. Podcasting is a unique way to both showcase your personality, your authenticity, and talk about the things that matter most, whether that's politics, maybe, or your family, how you love your golden retriever, how you think that mayonnaise is better with French fries than ketchup. You know, those are just some of my things. I don't even have a golden retriever, but that's an example. Whether that's passing the budget, why I personally think the Houston Cougars are going to win the NCAA tournament. Your dream dinner party guests. For Nick, it sounds like Marilyn and JFK at Le Diplomat, probably.
Yeah.
Or what made you want to serve in office. There's a podcast for that. So we've got some great examples here from both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, so you can see if you want to talk politics, there are podcasts for that. If you don't, there are podcasts for that. So you can see Senator Murphy wanted to talk about what is, going on the Hill. He went on Pod Save America. He was trying to talk to policy wonks, people who are nerdy. They wanted to hear about what, Senate Democrats are doing. So that's where Senator Murphy went. Governor Shapiro, his team was in the Super Bowl. He wanted to go on Inside the Birds, go Birds. So he went on Inside the Birds and didn't talk politics at all. He talked about the Eagles and why he thought they were going to win the Super Bowl. And he was right. And, he was trying to reach a very Pennsylvania audience. He is the governor of Pennsylvania. He went on a very specific podcast about a topic he's really passionate about. I was trying to figure out what else he's passionate about. And I think the answer is just sports. He just wants to go on sports podcasts.
Yeah, I think, on the other side of things, we talked a little bit about the Trump episode, but now Vice President Vance, then Senator Vance, went on Theo Vaughn's podcast this past weekend. And I've actually never laughed harder watching something related to politics in my life. They had some really like deep conversations about fentanyl crisis and how opioids have impacted both of their lives. But they also talked about like the dumbest shit they've ever done, and they were both cracking up. So JD was able to humanize himself a lot more than what was going on in the media, the eyeliner pics. By going on this past weekend with Theo, who has a wide range of guests and really has a unique audience. And then in a more traditional sense, Secretary Rubio just went on the Megyn Kelly show to talk about his trip to Panama, the president's plans for buying the Panama Canal, and Russia and Ukraine. So pretty straightforward politics, but Megyn is a political publisher and she covers those topics. So it's been a good fit. There's lots of other folks in the political space that you may not know of. Majority Report with Sam Cedar, Breaking Points, Ruthless. They were the first podcast in the White House briefing room, Young Turks, Midas Touch, and then Megyn Kelly and Pod Save and Daily Wire.
And just like with hosting a podcast, joining a podcast does come with risks and rewards. So we would be remiss if we didn't go through them.
Yeah, so the risks on joining a podcast, I think Nick really outlined this, but I really want to talk about my passion project, which is that I'm building wind chimes and donating the money to orphans in random place here. That's not what most creators are looking for. This is not an exchange of a media tour and you're going to go talk about your new project. If you don't want to have an authentic conversation, or if you're going on a cooking show and you're not willing to put on an apron and cook, most creators are not interested in having you on their show. So you do have less or no control of the questions and the editing. Like Nick said, though, some creators are willing to be pretty transparent. Here's what we want to ask. Here's how we're going to edit things. Hey, you said something you really shouldn't have said. My brother did this really weird thing once, and he's going to be so embarrassed if everyone in the whole world finds out. Many creators, they're just people, right? They're not necessarily following the same traditional rules and regulations that you might see in traditional journalism. Consider whether the creator is aligned to your brand. They don't have to care about all the same things, but have they talked about something so controversial that it's going to really piss off your base? Are they someone who, when you go on, you're going to feel really uncomfortable because you just have nothing in common with them and your principle is going to be really awkward? Make sure that you're doing that research and having that conversation with the creator to make sure it's a good fit on both sides. That includes vetting the creator, making sure you know what kind of content you're getting into. I'm sure many of you have created briefs for your boss. I'm sure many of your bosses don't read those briefs. When you sit down for a podcast, they really need to be prepared for what they're walking into. This is not rinse and repeat the same talking points, some speech over and over and over again. Really give them the opportunity to learn about the creator, know what they're getting themselves into, and then they don't have to prep their answers, but they need to know what they're walking into. And then the most important question, which I think is something that a lot of folks in DC and the civic space struggle with, is most of our elected officials and civic folks they're very polished. They have a very specific idea of what content should look like, what their speeches should sound like. They need to be reviewed by legal and by comms, and also their senior advisor, and sometimes their mom or their wife. And if you want to do well on a podcast and really connect with an audience, you have to be willing to be authentic.
But with risk, again, comes reward. And of course, the biggest reward of being a guest rather than a host on a podcast is that they have an established audience, they have viewership, they have reach, and it's going to help you reach new people that you haven't already. And, it is going to help humanize you if you're willing to get away from your talking points and have a real conversation. You are going to be with a podcast host that they have a goal of creating good content and having a good conversation with you. And you can reach kind of niche specific audiences. I think the example of Governor Shapiro on Inside the Birds, he wanted to talk to Pennsylvania sports fans. They were right there, an audience ready made. And again, you can bypass those traditional news formats, get your message across. As Nick said, you can have those longer conversations and really kind of dive in more on specific topics. It gives you more room to make the point you're trying to make and get the message across that you really, really want to reach people.
So some success stories we thought we'd share. I don't think I need to tell too much about this one, but it was kind of the podcast that broke the internet. President Trump's appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience last year. In the first 3 days after the episode dropped, President Trump picked up 14,000 new subscribers to his YouTube channel alone. 56 million views on the YouTube episode. A crazy number, and a huge amount of earned media across digital and print. So everyone was talking about the podcast, and then people were also watching the podcast, and it had a huge impact on not only President Trump's messaging and the perception of him, but also on the podcast landscaping and how it impacted the election.
Pretty famously, we don't have anything of the same scale on the left, but the vice president did go on Club Shay Shay towards the end of the election, and it had a lot of benefits and rewards for her team, including Club Shay Shay sharing content with her that got posted on her channel. We all know campaign teams really get strapped for time, particularly as we get closer to election day. They needed content for their channel, and they were able to post clips both in traditional YouTube horizontal format and shorts. It was the most viewed YouTube appearance of the campaign, she did a lot of smaller podcasts, but this was definitely beat the Wired autocomplete interview, et cetera, and also received earned media across a lot of outlets, more traditional like the New York Times. Nick. Yeah, that was definitely a highlight of the vice president's campaign and campaign YouTube channel, was the sharing of content. When she went on All the Smoke, she did Howard Stern. All of those clips also got posted to her YouTube channel, and she also got that content. And then, of course, earned media with outlets like the New York Times and the Daily Beast.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point about sharing content, and we're going to kind of walk through how do you work with creators, because it is different than traditional media. And Nick made a great point. Like, the Kamala team was able to get that content and put it on their channel. The Trump team actually didn't. You didn't see clips on their YouTube channel of any of his appearances, except for actually one, the entire episode of the Dr. Phil interview, randomly. But the point being, like, if you don't know what to ask for, you don't know what you can get. So we're going to talk a little bit about that now. So there's kind of 3 sections that we've outlined for y'all here, which is doing your research, developing your pitch, and doing your outreach. So the first thing is, there's lots of big podcasts, and you're going to hear all about them, and you probably know about them. I mean, I'm sure many of you, I am lit to watch Carolyn's episode on the Viall Files, like as soon as it's out, unless I already missed it. And I listen to The Toast every day, and I, turn on to listen to Barstool Sports sometimes when it's March Madness. So there are those big ones, but there's a lot of other podcasts in your districts, in your state, talking about your issues. And then you name it, there's a podcast for that. I outlined here, you want to talk about the Ag Bill? There's a podcast called Barn Talk. Want to talk about sports? New Heights or All the Smoke? You want to raise your national profile? Nothing like Club Shay Shay. Book release, go on the interview. Setting the record straight, maybe you need to talk to Alex Cooper at Call Her Daddy. And hard launching a new relationship, I think the Viall Files would be a great place to do that. But these are just some of the, a few of the ones that are out there. Do your research, but also reach out to our team. We're happy to point you in the right direction of smaller or, emerging podcasts that are interested in connecting with your guests.
And now Carly is letting me talk about my personal favorite thing, which is your YouTube channel is like your Hinge profile. If you are reaching out to a YouTube creator, they are going to look you up on YouTube. I promise. So make sure that your channel looks nice. Have a header, organize your channel, use playlists, make it look like you have logged into the channel in the past month. You don't have to put a ton of resources into it. We know you're all stretched very thin, but if a creator goes to your channel, giving them the impression that you understand the platform, the ecosystem, and maybe you don't just use your YouTube channel as an external hard drive for C-SPAN clips and floor speeches would be a really, really strong place to start. This is my personal passion project. And just think about, are you newsworthy? What kind of value prop are you giving the creator themselves? They have an audience. Why should they let you talk to their audience? And just kind of make sure you're asking these questions about the distribution plan. Are you going to get access to the content, the clips? What's happening? Are they posting on social and promoting? Are you going to pitch to the press? These are all really important questions to talk through when you're pitching.
And every creator will be different. So it's just important to be flexible, which brings me to my last piece, which is doing the outreach. So as we mentioned, we can be a great resource for you as a connector between civic folks and creators. Not every creator is going to be interested, but we will always ask their us at YouTube. Every creator that's doing something big on YouTube has an Emily or an I, similar to Erica and Nick. One thing I would note about podcasts is you want to move quickly, right? Like some people drop an episode once a week. Some people are dropping an episode once a month, but some of those opportunities are going to be there and then gone. And you can't wait 10 hours, 15 hours, 2 days for the comms director to reply and for the boss to get back to you. You need to be able to be pretty agile on these. And then you definitely need to be flexible. Every podcaster is going to have a different approach. They're going to have a different set of guidelines. And being willing to work with them is going to show that you're going to be someone that they're going to want to collaborate with in the future.
And then it's time to, if you're working with creators, so you want to, our biggest thing, the thing we always say is make sure you're respecting these creators. Creators, not all of them are professional journalists, but they are professionals and you need to treat them as such. No one knows their content and their audience better than the creator. And you should really be leaning into that expertise and really trusting their point of view and not be so afraid.
Yeah, and I think that's another good thing to establish when you're in those talks with creators is being really exceptionally clear about what your expectations are and what theirs are. Creators typically are not going to take editorial direction from guests. If you have topics you're not willing to discuss, be clear and upfront about that before you get to filming the episode. And it's not appropriate to ask any creator to just completely cut a section unless you've already had that conversation. Lots of creators do not regularly work with civic partners, okay? They're not used to working with politicians. They're not used to booking your folks. And we all work and live in DC, except for Nick. Thank God, you're very lucky. Every principal thinks that they're like the most important principal, and we get that. And for in many rooms, they are. But for this creator, that doesn't mean as much to them as it might to a traditional news outlet. So consider whether you're going to have to explain who your boss is and explain, no, they're a senator, not a congressman. No, they're from this district, not that district. Oh, actually, they represent the whole state. That's how a senator works. There are things that a lot of these creators may not know. It's not their bread and butter, and it's not really bad that they don't know it. So they're going to do their research. You should do your research accordingly as well and make sure you know what your boss is going to walk into. Make sure you're clear about expectations for the recording experience and the release of the episode ahead of time. Know when things are going to drop, know what clips you're going to get, and know if you are being asked questions by the press or if you're going to do a press release, what both sides are planning to, discuss, or if you're not going to talk about it at all.
And then another thing that we want to make sure we make clear is that this shouldn't be very transactional. Building a relationship with a creator can be one of the most impactful things you can do in the civic space. Creators do not exist in a silo. They have relationships with each other. If you're a bad guest, you are not getting invited anywhere again. Building that relationship, having a good experience can lead to more opportunities, more audiences, bigger audiences. They're connected to each other. And, one thing we've had success with in the past is you learn throughout the conversation, maybe the creator is really passionate about gun reform. You invite them to the off the record call, the briefing call on the new bill you just introduced. Let them know, follow up later, establish an actual relationship and not just a one-time situation.
Yeah, think about it in the same way that folks that work in press and comms develop relationships with reporters, but these are also people who are going to interact directly with your boss, and they have a very niche audience and a specific audience. How to make the most of it. Okay, so you did a podcast. Now what? What do we do now? There's a lot of ways to amplify. Like we said, the half-life of a podcast episode is much longer than the half-life of a television hit.
Yeah, and we mentioned previously, like, using related video linking, making sure that you are making the most of any appearance. If you post a short, you can see here how it links back to the long form content, making sure you're taking advantage of those tools that YouTube naturally has. And then also things like the community tab on your channel, underutilized resource on the YouTube platform. You can share images, text only, but also if a creator has shared the podcast on their channel, you can link and share that video in the community tab and make sure your audience sees it both in the subscription feed and on YouTube Home. And then, of course, you can pitch to the press, add to your newsletter, post on your official websites, and really take advantage of the tools already in your toolbox.
How can we help you? This is all a lot of information and it can be really daunting. So we are here to help. We at YouTube, and specifically on the YouTube Civics team, have outlined kind of 3 ways that we work with creators and match make them with Civics partners. So you have the first 2 sections are where we just connect you with the creator, we match make, as it were, and then we let you take it from there. And that's the interview format or a collab. So interview is like what you're thinking of. You appear on a podcast, that's pretty much it. You show up, they film the interview, we help connect you, and it's untied to a specific event or a moment. The next one is a collaboration. So maybe you have a podcast and you want to go on someone else's podcast. You do a podcast swap, and that's a collaboration. The content lives on both channels, or the 2 different unique pieces of content will live on your channel and the podcaster's channel. We typically on that side will do the matchmaking, and then obviously as your SPM, Emily and I will help you with anything you need on getting that content on your channel. And then the last one is what we call an engagement. So this is creating like an opportunity or a moment for with an existing event. So an example is like in the past or in the future with like White House Easter egg roll, like we bring creators to those events and help make sure that they're engaging in those moments. Maybe you're having a big celebration for America's 250th birthday next year, which is very exciting. And you want help bringing in creators to an event. We did a briefing with the Drug Enforcement Agency on fentanyl and their One Pill Can Kill campaign, and brought creators together for a briefing on that. We can also do that piece and help support sourcing the creators and also getting them there depending on what the event is.
And this can also look like a YouTube owned and operated event. Sometimes we will show up. We will be at a conference, a summit. We will be where many of your bosses will naturally be. We'll do things like a YouTube studio. We'll have a recording space, invite a group of creators, and then send out a wide call to all of your bosses to see who wants to come and talk to the creators that we have brought, so that you can make the most of your time at, whatever summit.
Yeah,
maybe
some
NGA.
examples are like NGA, Davos, ANGA, G7, APEC, and many more. And if you have ideas or you work on something that you think is a great place for us to be, let us know. Okay, we're ready to take questions. We've got the boxes coming forward now. So if anyone has questions in the audience, we're ready.
Someone ask a question, because I just like when the toss boxes go into the audience. That's my favorite thing we do. Anybody? Oh,
okay, Carlos.
Hey, Carlos.
Sorry.
Oh, Sam, throw the box. Ugh.
I'm glad he didn't, because I wasn't exactly confident I was going to catch it. So everything you just mentioned is particularly about the 250th birthday. Definitely would apply for my organization, since this, June 14th is the Army's 250th birthday, and what you just mentioned with the events, that seems like a great idea for an organization like ours, which is a little more apolitical. So how would that exactly work? Would that be a collaboration between the two of you with, we want to make sure we have the proper representation on both sides? Because we have an event coming up on the mall that would be perfect for something like this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, luckily you get to talk to me all the time, Carlos. So,
and we're a dynamic duo. We work together all the time. So if you're
sit
doing
next to each other, we annoy everyone in the office.
Everyone hates us.
Yeah,
but
we can definitely source both political creators, but also non-political creators. I mean, we brought, Babish to the White House.
Oh, I love
the Sorry Girls to meet the First Lady. I mean, we have a vast network. Everyone from Joe Rogan to Oprah to Taylor Swift has one of us.
Yep.
Y'all are just lucky that you get to work with us. So we could definitely be in touch and work on sourcing creators for that.
Yeah, to be clear, we are the best ones. So you're very lucky.
Anybody else in the room have questions? Anyone online have questions? Okay, cool.
Great.
Well, you know where to find us. And right now we're going to wrap this. And speaking of AI and making your lives easy. Oh, we have an online question. It's okay.
Hi, Audrey.
She came from nowhere on high.
Hi. We
Hey.
have an online question from Leslie Clark. Can you talk about podcast seasons and any recommendations you have?
Yeah, it's a great question. Leslie's from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. If you've never been, you should definitely go down in Williamsburg. I think every podcaster has a different approach to seasons. Some folks are going to do that on an annual calendar, and some folks do it based on a certain number of episodes, whether that's 100 episodes, 50 episodes a season, and it depends on how you're planning that out. I will say, most viewers and most consumers of content have no idea what season of your podcast you're on. They might pay attention to things like your 500th episode, or we've been celebrating our 5th year anniversary, but seasons are something that really mostly applies to you and the way that you structure your content, and less to your viewers. Okay, cool. Yeah, Nick.
Well, I would say we don't pay attention to seasons at all. It's the quality rises to the top, and I think that's just more of a legacy mindset.
Yeah, you heard it from Nick first. Erica, tell us.
Hi, online. I would also say if you're going to do seasons and seasons with like a hiatus in between, to make sure you communicate that very effectively with your audience. Otherwise, like, they won't know where the heck you went. And like remind them when you're going to be back on and all of that fun stuff.
Okay, great. Well, if you need to find us and you don't have our email already, you can always catch us at the YouTube-civics@google.com alias, or Emily and I tend to follow Taylor Swift around the world, so sometimes we do take vacations, and if we're not available, one of us will answer this inbox. But now I'm excited to hand things over to my colleagues on the Google team, Maureen and Sam, who, speaking of AI, Nick, are going to talk about how to use AI to make your life easier. So welcome, Maureen.
Hello, friends. Nice to meet you all. I am Sam. I'm here with my incredible colleague, Maureen. As Carly mentioned, we are on the Google Civics Outreach team. So you might be familiar with our team, but basically we are here to help federal campaigns and officials with all the Google products. And today we're here to talk to you specifically about using AI tools to amplify your podcasts and podcast content. I'll take it over, Maureen.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I want to start with a couple of questions. So raise your hand if you're looking forward to mingling with Nick after this presentation. All right, great. Raise your hand if you've used AI in your personal or work capacity. Awesome. Raise your hand if you use it on a weekly or even daily basis. A lot fewer. Okay. Like Sam mentioned, and our colleagues, we work on the Civics Outreach team. We are specifically your Civics Outreach managers for the federal portfolio. So my colleague Natalie is in the back for any state and local, any governors, state reps, state legislators. But we go around sharing how you all can use AI in your work, but also in your personal life. Today, we're going to focus on just 2 products, Gemini and Notebook LM. And we're going to try and make them as relevant as possible to this conversation and to your work. So first of all, let's dive into Gemini. Gemini is a Google product that allows you to collaborate with generative AI, and it's powered by a large language model. This is sort of the novel AI technology that's come on the scene the last couple of years. Most of us have used a chatbot in some form. Gemini is Google's chat-based model. We typically talk about prepping for media engagements using Gemini. We want to talk about the anatomy of a great prompt. A lot of us are used to Google search, where you use 1 or 2 search terms. Here, we're really asking you to put more into AI in order to get a more productive result. So you don't have to use these in any particular order or use all of them, but these are a few ways that you can get the most out of AI. Giving it a role, defining the goal, specify the audience, set restrictions in style, and format. All of these are really helpful because they'll give you the most useful response that you're looking for. My favorite role to give it is like a high school teacher. There are so many concepts that either I'm curious about or I'm curious of how I'm going to share that concept with an audience. And I like to break it down. Maybe it's a high school teacher, maybe it's an elementary school teacher, depending on the day. So again, to keep this as relevant as possible, I could have asked Gemini to shorten this, but I think it's helpful to see what it initially put out. And I'd also, we don't all have to read every response. You can just see the quality of the responses because the Viall Files is such a popular and content-rich show. But I like the spicy potential questions, Nick's signature. because it does acknowledge that I said it was for a government official. It tries to stay on task, but it sort of acknowledges some of the obvious things in the room, including with the introduction saying, knowing his style, there'll be personal questions as well as questions about you as a guest. We also want to talk about after you record, right? Social media is a huge way and, a huge distribution center, a piece of your owned media. And so we want to talk about using AI to draft tweets to get you off a blank page or to give it content that you've already produced and it actually taking out some useful tidbits. So again, I really like the way that Gemini has characterized some of these things in terms of being intriguing versus policy focused versus short and sweet. And if you want it to be more of one thing or another, feel free to follow up and ask in this format, like, hey, I'd like more that are funnier. I'd like you to lean into this aspect of either the interview or a personality trait or anything like that. And then next, I just want to highlight that we now have Gemini Live. So within the Gemini app, which is on both iOS and Android, you can chat and talk naturally with Gemini. The best way of highlighting this is I'm actually going to play the ad that we launched during the Super Bowl this year. How many of you watched the Super Bowl? All right. And
so at my last job, I was working across several different groups. You know what? Let me practice that one again.
Okay. When you're ready, tell me about the job that taught you the most.
Okay. Well, it was a role where I learned to take constructive criticism.
I think she like, oh, nope, doesn't like it.
Okay. I got pretty used to, working long hours with a small team. I got very comfortable multitasking. And I had to become really organized.
Not bad, but try rephrasing your answer to sound more confident.
Right. Okay. I was asked to make a lot of quick decisions and do a lot of negotiating. One more book.
Talk about your experiences working with others.
Oh, well, I'm at my best when I'm collaborating. If it's for the team, I'll do whatever it takes.
This job description you shared mentions on-the-job training.
Well, I am a fast learner. I don't always have all the answers, but I get the job done. No matter how long it takes. And I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong. But most importantly, I show up every day, no matter what.
All right, last question. When it comes to work, what motivates you?
I guess knowing that people can depend on me. And knowing I can depend on them too.
That's a great answer. Sounds like you're ready.
Hey, James, thanks for joining us.
It's good to see you all. I've been looking forward to talking.
I mean, that was better than me demoing, hey, Gemini, help me prepare for an interview on the Viall Files. But I will say that it's a great way to have your boss practice. And I remember from my days working campaigns, there's a lot of time in the car with your principal. There's a lot of time sort of in between things. And having Gemini Live at your fingertips, open, and being able to be conversational is definitely an asset that you all can take advantage of. So visit Gemini to get started. Like I said, we have an app for both iPhone and Android users. But now we're going to talk about Notebook LM. Notebook LM is one of our newest tools. It's become very popular in the last year, and I really think it's something that you all as policy wonks and with specific principles can spend a lot of time with and get a lot out of. What makes Notebook LM different than traditional chatbots is what we call grounding. So you're going to ground the large language model in your own sources. When you put something into Gemini, it draws on, the internet's worth of sources. However, with Notebook LM, you are basically creating custom AI, you're uploading your own sources, and that is the truth from which it gives you your answers. It can automatically generate summaries and study guides, give you a big picture view of your sources, and it features inline citations as well. So we're talking about huge pieces of legislation, we're talking about press releases, we're talking about articles, putting them all in one place and being able to really interrogate and have a conversation with those sources specifically. So here I've just outlined a couple of the differences. You know, Gemini is great. It understands a lot of creative formats. It draws on, what is already publicly available. With Notebook LM, you can both control the context window, meaning I don't want it to draw on everyone's opinion. I want to present a specific point of view. My sources present that point of view. That's what I want to be communicated in the responses. But also you can upload sources that aren't necessarily publicly available. And you can query from your own draft materials, internal memos, etc. Your data is not used to train the model when it's put into Notebook LM. So here is the same sort of thinking about prepping your principal for media engagement, but instead of the anatomy of a great prompt, I've included the types of sources you might upload. And so you might upload a video from YouTube, which we have as one of the options, a recent article, maybe of the person who you will be doing the interview with, text of the bill that you've just introduced, a recent economic report to back up why each of these things matter. And then you'll put in a very similar prompt into Notebook LM as you would into Gemini, but it'll be grounded in who your member is, what you're talking about, with whom you're having the conversation. Likewise, here are a couple of sources that I've uploaded for Nick specifically, in an example I'm about to show you, and a couple of prompts. Creating a briefing document. This is exactly what Carly was talking about, right? Like, you want to brief your member on who he is as a host. And then the prompt that I'll show after that is anticipating some questions based on specific episodes of his that I've uploaded. So real quick, I just want to highlight, some of our most useful features are already built in. You don't even have to engineer the prompt. A study guide is basically your guide to a great interview. It anticipates questions and drafts responses for you. So it's great to get off a blank page. This is a briefing doc. So this talks, based on all of the sources on Nick that I uploaded, it gives sort of an overarching, what are key themes that he repeatedly goes back to, as well as then breaking down per source a summary of the episodes that I uploaded. This goes on for pages worth. I just wanted to show you all a snippet. Additionally, and you can see on the left the type of sources I'm uploading, right? You're seeing that I'm uploading PDFs. I'm uploading live links to web pages, as well as obviously the video content from his podcasts. Here we have asked about sort of those questions that you might anticipate. However, now you've got inline citations that says, hey, he's going to ask about relationships and communication style, but here's an episode where he asked a similar guest about relationships and communication style. So again, this would be even more useful if I put in the bio of your member and said, all right, now you're interviewing rep so-and-so. Didn't want to risk that here, but so again, the more that you give it, the more useful the output is back. So if your member's family owned a bar, Nick may specifically ask about that. And this would, again, help anticipate questions. And with that, visit Notebook LM to get started. Currently, you have a 50 source max, but I recommend creating notebooks for different policy areas. Maybe your press team has one of every press release you've put out this year. Maybe your policy team has it of all the draft bills. Comparing and contrast pieces of legislation maybe that you've introduced as opposed to the Senate version. Super useful, happy to answer questions. It's a lot of information, as Carly mentioned, and we're so close to a happy hour. So I think that you can ask Sam and I questions after this presentation, and we're always at the other end of this alias civics-outreach@google.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sam and Maureen, and thank you to everyone for being here. This is my favorite because I love Moana. And I love Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I think he should run for president. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. A huge thank you again to Nick for being with us today. I think we all learned a lot from him, myself included. Just outside here, we're going to have light bites and drinks, and we hope that you'll join us there. All right. Thanks, guys.